Got a good crew here. I think we can get started. So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Liam Murphy. I'm the chair of the board of CALM, and we're honored that we have some amazing speakers here today. And thank you, all of you guests that are joining us. I can see the list. We've got CALM board members. We've got elected officials, a lot of great community volunteers and philanthropists and folks that are making a difference in Santa Barbara County. So thank you all for being here. I'll just quickly run through our order of events here and introduce our speakers, and then we'll be on to our content. So the goal of our webinar is to really deepen our understanding of the unseen trauma that many families in our community are experiencing, particularly as that's aggravated by the pandemic and stay-at-home orders and the general stress that people are experiencing. So we're going to highlight the role and the responsibility of local organizations, talk about what they're doing to ensure positive outcomes for our community, and we'll be specifically hearing more about what the DA's office and justice system are doing to ensure that as well. So a couple of quick housekeeping items. We will have a question and answer session at the end of our conversation. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there should be a box that says Q&A. If you click on that, you're welcome to type in questions. You can type those as we go or wait till the end, but we will hold all the answers until the end. And I think those are the main things. We can't hear any of the audience members, so you won't be able to ask questions out loud, but we also won't be able to hear dogs barking or kids playing or anything, so don't feel bad about those things. It's just a part of life these days. And I do want to acknowledge that we're hosting this conversation in the midst of our global health pandemic and a time of extreme civil unrest as our nation's reacting to generations of racial injustice and systemic oppression. So there's a lot going on. We aren't able to address all of that, but we just want to acknowledge that and state that we have solidarity with those who are oppressed and don't have a voice. And that's one of the things that we want to be advocating for, particularly the unseen victims and the challenges that families are experiencing in these difficult times. So that's the backdrop to our conversation today, but let me introduce our panelists, and they are all wiser and more experienced and better educated than I am, so it'll be great to hear from them. First, we have Joyce Dudley, who is the current acting district attorney for Santa Barbara County. Thanks, Joyce. You look surprised. Joyce has been a part of the DA's office for 30 years, and she's the elected district attorney for the last 10. She has 2 master's degrees in education, particularly with an emphasis on early childhood education, and was formerly the director of Head Start for Santa Barbara County. Presently, she's the chair of the Commission on Post, which is the agency that sets standards for training for all of California's law enforcement officers. And she's the mother of 4 sons and the grandmother to 4, so has lots of different experiences that she'll be able to draw from to share with us today. She's joined by Megan Riker-Rheinschild, who has been a member of the DA's office for 26 years. The first 3 of those, Megan was focused on being a victim advocate for Spanish-speaking victims of crime, and she was assigned to the domestic violence unit. Since then, she's had 23 years as the DA's office Victim Witness Assistance Program Director. And so she oversees 3 offices, 20 staff, more than 4,000 victims annually that are impacted in the full spectrum of violent crime, from property crimes to homicide survivors. She's also, since 2000, been the responsible for the oversight for the Sexual Assault Response Team, also known as SART. That's a group that CALM works in partnership very frequently. And Megan also began the countywide Human Trafficking Task Force in 2013 to help address that unfortunate reality of human trafficking in our county. We also have Alana Walczak joining us. Alana is the president and CEO of CALM. She's held that role for 4.5 years already. It's amazing, Alana. I remember when we were just getting started. Has it been that long? So 4.5 years, Alana's been at the helm of CALM. CALM's mission is to heal families and children and build resilient communities and work on child abuse prevention as well as treatment. Alana, before that, served in the nonprofit leadership roles for more than 25 years. 19 of those were in Santa Barbara County, particularly with a focus on the elimination of violence and abuse and strengthening children, families, and communities. And she is the proud mama of soon-to-be 10-year-old daughters, twins. So that's a quick overview. Each of our panelists will speak for approximately 8 minutes. We'll start with Joyce, then Megan, then Alana. And then after that, we'll open it up to our Q&A just a little bit after 2:30. So our goal is to be wrapped up by 3. So hopefully we'll have time to answer most of the questions that come up. And we will also be recording this, and we'll share the link with all the attendees once it's recorded and processed. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Joyce Dudley.
Thank you. When I had that reaction, you used the term that I was the acting district attorney. And in my mind, that always meant that I wasn't the real one. So I thought, acting, man, I thought I've been at this gig a very long time and I feel pretty real. So yeah, I've been in the DA's office 30 years and the district attorney for 10 years. Anyway, I was thinking today about what I might like to share with you in the next few minutes. And for those of you that don't know me, you have to know how long I've been involved in focusing on child abuse and trying to stop child abuse. And the frightening number is 50 years, 50. I began volunteering with abused children when I was in high school. I went to a place called the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. It was formed after the cruelty to animals in New York City. They said, gee, you know, we're taking care of animals, let's give some thought to our kids. And I literally started volunteering there 1 day a week. To give you this perfect image of what it was like, I was actually a dance major, and so I would come in my leotards and tights and want to teach these children how to dance. That lasted for my first visit because many of them were in such shocking physical condition that dance was the last thing that they could do. They were burnt, they were in wheelchairs, they were desperately sad. And there was nothing like CALM in those days, nothing. The only thing this facility was doing in those days was to physically get the children away from the abusers, and that was pretty much it. Because if they left a little high school student alone with 10 and 20 of these kids, you had to know the services weren't very well developed. So when I came to Santa Barbara and started working with CALM, it was euphoria. The kind of organization that CALM is just not replicated anywhere in the country as far as I'm concerned. So let me talk to you about abused children. The fan for me, my passion for this work really began when I walked into that New York City building. It was dilapidated. And the only thing that looked alive were the children's eyes. And they looked toward me, you know, as a little high schooler, to be their friend and to help them. And I was never abused as a child. I grew up in a nonviolent household, so I didn't understand abuse. And I think that shock of it all made me want to stop it. And so then I began my education, and ultimately I felt the only way I could do that would be to go to night law school and be a deputy district attorney to try those cases, and then ultimately the district attorney to set policy and to make a statement about child abuse in our incredible county. So this has been a dream to make things better for a long time, and then all of a sudden COVID hit. And I have to give Megan credit for this. I have an extraordinary executive staff team. Megan is one of those members. And when we got together the first time, which I think was Friday, March 13th, and we didn't really have any idea about where we were going, but I said, okay, everybody, talk to me about what you think the most pressing issues are going to be. Megan spoke up first, and what she said was right on. She said it's going to be in-home crimes, it's going to be domestic violence, and it's going to be child abuse. Those are the crimes we're not going to know about. And she was absolutely right. And why do we think that COVID-19 was such a catalyst for all of this? Well, we know that crime, if it's predictable, it's preventable. What we also knew in this case was that we couldn't prevent it. And for people like us, that was a shocking realization, because the children and the domestic violence victims were in homes, and the perpetrator was there, and the perpetrators weren't willing to let other people into the homes. Now they had a reason not to let other people into the homes, and the children weren't getting out. Who are our usual mandated reporters? Teachers, clergy, doctors, nurses, strangers, people in grocery stores. They're the ones that pick up the phone and call 911, or they called CWS. But there were no eyes on those kids anymore. And the other thing we knew is that there was a sense of hopelessness in many of these homes. People were very afraid. They were afraid for the family members who might get COVID. They were afraid that they weren't going to be able to get their jobs or have their jobs or get their jobs back. They were afraid they were going to be kicked out of their homes. They were afraid they couldn't put food on the table for their families. And the fear was very, very real. And then you add to that the alcohol and drugs that are just an arm's reach away. And that was the perfect storm for domestic violence and child abuse. So the only thing we really could do about it was to really spend a tremendous amount of time getting out there and talking about it, in the hopes that family members and friends would check in on friends. I've spoken to divorce lawyers and asked them, call their clients, check in and see how they're doing, family lawyers. Started doing press conferences, started doing, letters to the editor and op-ed pieces, and Megan and I and the rest of our staff were just out there. We got a poster about it, and Megan and I and a few other people from the DA's office went to the food bank and stuffed those posters in the boxes of food. I think we produced 3,000 of those. They were both in Spanish and English. Megan quickly figured out how to get a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week bilingual person on the phone in case people were hesitant to call 911, and they could talk to an expert in victim crimes, 24/7, bilingual, and it gave people yet another avenue to report. I'm also on the executive committee of a national organization called Prosecutors Against Gun Violence. I approached them and said, why don't we do a national conference on in-home crimes? And we certainly can tie in gun violence and safe storage and things like that. One of my good buddies is the district attorney of the Bronx. She was going to handle the child abuse component. We put on the conference. She emailed me the next day, and I don't really think I could do this out, my voice cracking. She told me that a little 2-year-old was shook to death by her father, who recently lost his job because of COVID, and he was home and he felt inadequate and he was drunk, and he made a really horrible decision and he killed his 2-year-old. And it was exactly our greatest fear. And this is just one person calling me from one other place in the country. So what do we have that those other places don't have. We have calm. We have a place where if I'm concerned, I pick up the phone, I talk to calm right away. We get people into calm right away. We have a resource. We can't just sit on our hands and say, oh, I feel so terrible about that. We have an organization that has been around for years that really makes a difference in children's lives. So I know when this COVID passes and when kids get back into school and camps and back to their doctors, we're going to get a massive report of child abuse. And who's going to be there for us? The law enforcement officer is going to make the arrest. Prosecutors in my office are going to prosecute. But that's just a tiny period of time. What we need and what we've always needed is calm. So, Alana, I can't thank you enough for heading this remarkable organization. And it's my honor to be here today to talk about that.
Thank you, Joyce. That's a very sobering and compelling story. Thank you for the work that you're doing as well. Megan, would you like to share your thoughts, please?
Sure. So for those of you that aren't familiar, I'm just going to say a couple words about the Victim Witness Assistance Program. So many people I run into in my daily life will say, hey, I've never heard of that program. And if you haven't, as a citizen of our county, that's a good thing. That means you probably haven't been a victim or a witness of a violent crime. But we're a somewhat little known program in the district attorney's office that, as mentioned, reaches out to victims throughout the county. And that can range from property crime all the way to homicide survivors. We're also now, unfortunately, in the more regular business of serving victims of mass casualties. So we have been involved in deploying out to Las Vegas. We responded to the Family Assistance Center of the Conception boat fire. And as our world is changing, we're a little more out front and center of these events, providing resources and referrals and information to people that need it at the most critical time. So one of the things that we do well is help people navigate the criminal justice system who don't understand how it works. And in the best of circumstances, as you all can imagine, navigating the criminal justice system if you don't have a law degree, have never been a victim of or a witness of a crime, when the courts are fully opened, is no small task. And the advocates countywide will provide a roadmap to victims and provide crisis intervention along the way, court support, and many other services as a case works its way through the process. Obviously now with the courts closed and pretty much trials and many hearings at a standstill, and furthermore, the jail not necessarily detaining individuals who they otherwise would have detained because of COVID, we developed a couple of different strategies that I think has been really fruitful. In terms of reaching out and reaching in these households that Joyce mentioned, where families are very stressed, and even in the best of circumstances, I think we can all attest to how stressful this time is for individuals and families. So we did set up this 24/7 line, and we've been answering calls at any time of the day. Sometimes they're just calls like, what would happen if I called law enforcement? What would that look like? And so it gives people an opportunity to look ahead and prepare. And maybe not right now, if they choose not to, they may call just anonymously, but get resources and referrals like COM and others and legal aid to navigate their path forward during COVID. So the 24/7 line has been very useful. The other thing we did straight away was we had law enforcement countywide send us all of the emergency protective orders that were being issued out in the field. And so generally speaking, emergency protective orders are issued for a 5 business days to an individual who has reason to believe that they're in harm's way. And many times in those situations, the suspect, if you will, or the partner isn't arrested on the scene. So we won't see those cases unless the case is referred to our office as a filing, meaning that one of the attorneys here is looking at it because time is of the essence and we need to file charges. So now what we're doing is we have every single law enforcement agency in the county sending those emergency protective orders to us real time. So in that way, what we can do is catch people that we might not know about right away and provide them resources and referrals and do safety planning with them, make contingency plans, and also work with our local law enforcement partners. If someone is on the run, let's say, we had a case in the very beginning. It was a very serious domestic violence case that involved a strangulation, and the suspect was on the run for a couple of days, and we partnered with our local law enforcement agency to pursue that individual and ultimately arrest him and then do safety planning with the family while he was not in custody. So that was an opportunity for us to create this new procedure. The other thing that we're doing, and we have been doing all along, but now we're stepping it up in terms of our vigilance, is some of you might not realize that the district attorney's office is the recipient of all of the child welfare reports. So when somebody fills out a report and they suspect abuse of a child, we receive those written reports every single day here. So we have designated staff that will review those and look to see if there's a more immediate intervention that might be made, not just by child welfare, but by our sexual assault response team, and I'll talk about that in a minute, or whether an advocate should reach out to local law enforcement and get law enforcement and child welfare to dovetail their investigation together and do proactive outreach on those investigations. So we're doing that routinely every single day. The other thing we're doing is anytime we get a law enforcement report in, we're ensuring that a cross report has been made to child welfare services. So law enforcement is required to make a cross report, but as they bring on many new officers, sometimes a few cases here and there might fall through the cracks. So we're making sure that the law enforcement reports that we get also get cross-reported to child welfare. And in that way, those individuals can get the supportive services, for example, through CALM, to help safety plan and create a more stable environment for that home. So that's been impactful. One of the things I want to talk about is our partnership with CALM as it relates to our sexual assault response team. This is a really incredibly critical partnership that we have had for many years, really since the late 80s, when the SART briefly, it's a multidisciplinary team that responds to allegations of child abuse. That could be sexual abuse, physical abuse, or child sexual exploitation, sometimes also known as child sex trafficking. So we partner with CALM with their forensic interviewer team, who are clinicians that do interviews for the purposes of gathering information in a child-friendly, trauma-informed environment, for the purposes of not only getting the child and the family supportive services on scene immediately, but also for putting together the criminal investigation and ultimately and sometimes the prosecution. So although our numbers have been down, and a lot of this information, as I was thinking about putting on or talking to you all about this subject, everything that we know right now is anecdotal. I don't think we're really going to have any hindsight for some time. And it could be sort of a tsunami boomerang effect. But what we're seeing right now is that since March 1st, we've had 40 requests for forensic interviews. Last year at this time, we had 60 requests for forensic interviews countywide. So you can see the number dipped for all the reasons that we've been talking about and Joyce mentioned. And so However, I think what's important to note is the kinds of cases that we've been seeing are very serious and very acute. So we saw a case in Santa Maria of a 7-year-old that was strangled. We did a forensic interview for that. We've seen cases, an uptick in child exploitation, kids who might be chatting or communicating with individuals who are preying upon them. We've seen an uptick in that. We've seen a child rape situation. This is unusual for such a short amount of time. The other thing that's pretty extraordinary is we also partner with the public health department who does all the forensic medical exams. And during this same time frame last year, we had 0 requests for child forensic exams. These are medical forensic exams. And they're reserved really for the most acute cases where we think we might find physical forensic findings. During this time, we've had 6 since March 1st. Last year, we had 0. So again, just another indicator of what we're seeing across the bow and how we're interfacing with the public to try to provide the most critical services to children and their families. Last thing, I don't want to go on too long. There's a lot more I'm sure we all can say, but it's an interesting is not the right word. It's a time where we have all of these factors converging that are not in our favor. The courts being closed, people being sequestered in their homes, and victims who, potential victims who want to engage in the process, but have difficulty because of their inability to interact face to face. So we really rely on our partnerships with CALM and the telemedicine that's going on and the teleworking that we're doing to stand up these services to individuals that are in crisis right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan, and thanks for sharing those statistics, which are heartbreaking, but I know I don't see those. Most of us on this call don't see those, and you say 40 reports that have come across your desk, and that sounds like a big number to me, but I understand that it's the actual amounts reported are lower than in years past. But as I see Joyce nodding, and I think we all understand that unfortunately that's just what's being reported. The actual number of cases and what we'll come to find out later, unfortunately, are going to be much higher. So I'm going to turn it over to Alana, who can share a little bit more. And I'm guessing your remarks aren't going to be all that uplifting, Alana, but I know you've got a few things for us to take away of, what can we as community members do to help? So I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks. I'll try to be uplifting, although there's not a lot of uplifting right about now. But I just want to first start with huge kudos and love to Joyce and Megan. I was thinking about this yesterday as I was preparing. I think I've known both of you for 16 years or so, back in another lifetime when I worked for the Rape Crisis Center, now STESA, but we partnered on the SART collaborative. And for those of you on this call that don't know either Joyce or Megan personally, you just can't ask for stronger, more passionate, more committed advocates that are doing their very best every single day to do right by victims of crime and survivors of violence. And it's heartening for me personally and professionally that both of you are in the roles that you have, because our community owe you both a debt of gratitude. So I am honored to share the stage with the two of you. I'll just say, I know you mentioned it, Liam, but just the weight of the moment that we find ourselves in right now. I mean, we're entering the 12th week of shelter in place from COVID, but if you think about historic systemic oppression of peoples of color, we're entering the 26,000th week of that. And, I think what COVID has really highlighted, we know that abuse is related to stressors. Abuse and trauma happen when adults are stressed and abuse others. And COVID created stressors like we haven't ever seen in our lifetimes: economic, health insecurity, fear of death, death of loved ones, just anxiety and panic, loss of normalcy, of routine. And that is for all of us. And then I think if you are part of a historically oppressed community, communities of color, you've had, or if you're a trauma survivor, you've had so many stressors in your lifetime that this recent 12 weeks fueled that and amplified that. So it's really a difficult time, as both Joyce and Megan have talked about. I think all families are at risk from being cooped up, the feelings of overwhelm and loss of control and regular routine. And then I think of families that are facing racism, facing immigration, facing ableism, facing all of the other forms, facing chronic poverty. Their stressors are just through the roof right now. So we're dealing with that as a county, and as communities, we're dealing with that as a nation and as a world. So as has been discussed, incidences of abuse and violence are definitely up. Reports are dramatically down. Eyes just aren't on those kids, with schools closed, preschools closed, out and about not happening. During the recession of 2008, we had spikes of very significant traumas. At that point, the greatest blunt force trauma injuries that were coming into emergency rooms were of infants, because the first year of life at any time is the most at risk for abuse, because babies are need intensive, they're high need. And during the recession of 2008, that's where we saw the most egregious forms of abuse was with babies. Some of the data that was coming out that I saw early in COVID, I don't know if it's shifted in recent weeks, but the blunt force trauma, head traumas were centered on 3-year-olds this time around, which is just a staggering and heartbreaking figure to think about. But it makes some sense because preschools and elementary schools are closed. So if you have multiple children and they're all at home with you and schools are closed, it's the toddlers and the preschoolers that need your attention. And so those were the kiddos that were winding up, as Megan's saying, with these egregious physical abusive situations. So I would just want to say to everyone that's listening that throughout all of this, calm services have been uninterrupted. We're here, we're an essential service. So we've pivoted all of our work to telehealth. We're preparing to come back to in-person services likely at the end of this month or early July. We're looking at how to do that safely. But we knew the tsunami of violence was coming. We've seen it before. This is the work we do. And with shelter in place, we knew that there would just be hidden traumas, because not every home is safe for every child in the best of circumstances. But when you add these stressors, it compounds the risk for abuse and violence so tremendously. So we've been trying to speak up from the beginning. Like Joyce, we were trying to do some media to really help our community realize the risks and the dangers for children. We've continued to provide services, individual and family counseling services via telehealth. But I would say over the last 5-10 years, a big focus of our work was really trying to go systematically and engage the educational system and the medical system. So before COVID, we had staff embedded in preschools and elementary schools and pediatric clinics across the county. That's all pivoted to telehealth. But those relationships, that's really, if we're going to shift an issue as complex as trauma, we need to be working in tight collaboration across systems. So CALM has really defined itself. We've always been a social service agency. I think now we're trying to become a social change agency, really partnering at the system level. And in COVID, that's meant really doing creative strategies of outreaching to families on the social service end, but then really developing creative partnerships with the system end of things as a social change agency. So I would also say not only have we broadened our trauma response services, but I think our communities really are advancing their understanding of trauma. It's really moved from abuse only to an understanding that trauma is more broadly defined. It includes domestic violence, it includes substance abuse, it could include divorce, death, incarceration, mental health of a parent, anything that disrupts that connection between caregiver and child. But in our local communities, we've also seen trauma expand quite beyond interpersonal trauma and violence. We've had natural disasters of fires and debris flows and mass shootings. Then we've had this global pandemic, which has taken trauma to a whole new level. And then over the last several weeks, just a resurgence of attention to historical and generational trauma of racism and other forms of oppression. So the issues are big, and they confound each other, and they heighten each other, and they amplify each other. Calm considers ourselves to be a trauma-informed organization or a trauma-responsive organization. So rather than asking a client, what's wrong with you? We ask, what happened to you? And I think as we move in this time, all of us organizationally and as individuals, we should be asking those questions of not only individual clients, but we may also need to be asking them of entire communities. Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, because there's a story to tell of trauma upon trauma that is bubbling up right now. The other thing I want to mention is just Calm sees that this crisis is long-term. This is not, as soon as shelter in place ends, the crisis doesn't end. We have the immediate mental health needs of children being in great danger, of anxiety levels and depression levels being high. There's going to be intermediate mental health levels when some folks start to return to work, the fear of going back to work environments, going back out into restaurants, when school comes back in some format. Teachers, children, parents are all going to be dealing with new levels of stress, especially after a summer without camp. Those of us working parents, by the time some level of school returns, we're all going to be at our wits' end, but there's long-term ramifications. I think suicide levels, sadly, are going to go up. I think what's happening behind closed doors right now, these stories that we're only, as Megan's seeing, starting to see glimpses of how egregious this is, we're going to be dealing with that for 5, 10, 15 years. So Calm is here, and we see that this is a marathon, not a sprint. We have to pace ourselves. I'm telling that for my gifted clinicians, that they have to take care of themselves so that we can be here for the mental health needs in the long term. But I would say, just like there are those layers of trauma of individual and then regional and global and historical, if you work that back, that's how you build resiliency. So we're not going to be able to fix this on a global scale, but we do have power at the personal and interpersonal level, and developing resilience practices is what we're trying to teach our families. So right now, what I'm hoping is that for all of us to get through this, that we really invest in our own personal resiliency. So that's things like good sleep, good nutrition, mindfulness practices, connecting with friends and family in whatever ways we can. For children, the greatest form of resilience is having a close connection to a loving, stable adult. That's what matters most for a child. For the rest of that child's life, that's what builds resilience. So I think, I so appreciate the support from my colleagues. I think Calm is truly at the epicenter of this crisis for children and families. We are being called upon like never before. And our support services and those of our colleague agencies that we partner with on a daily basis are going to be needed for this community to remain strong and whole, so that children and families can come out the other side and really add value for the rest of their lives. So I guess just like we're trying to find practical ways to deal with COVID, like something that gives us peace of mind as we come in, we wash our hands, 20 seconds. I think there's some of our colleagues from Cottage on this call. I've heard you, 20 seconds, washing my hands. I think we also need to find really practical ways of building mental health capacity because, and really helping children and families build resilient practices, because the repercussions of this time are going to be with us for a very long time. So that's our work, and I'm so proud of my gifted clinician colleagues who are truly saving lives right now, every single day. So I'll pause there, Liam.
Yeah, thank you, all three of you, for your thoughts. You'll notice there are a few questions in the Q&A section, a few I've tried to answer as they've come up, but there are several that you all are much more qualified to answer. I've also got a couple of questions, but I think one of the things I'd like to ask you all, and then we'll get to the Q&A from our listeners, is what kind of new strategies are there for outreach, both with the hope of providing prevention, but also outreach to potential victims of abuse and trauma in the home? Joyce, you're on mute if you're trying to answer that.
Elena, I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned an increase in suicide. Are you thinking children committing suicide or parents or both? Talk to me about that, please, so I can be more educated.
We're starting to see teen suicide, attempts going up. I think that there will be, this is me as one human telling you what I think. I don't necessarily know. I worry about teens.
Okay.
I worry about fathers who there's a lot of masculinity issues with economic downturn times that I think will hit fathers really hard. And then I worry about seniors who have been isolated and are most at risk of health repercussions from COVID, have been separated from family and grandchildren. So I worry about all teens. I mean, I think suicide, as we all know, tends to bend towards male, but it happens for all genders. But I worry about teens, fathers, and seniors.
Okay. Well, let's talk offline about more ideas we might have about getting in front of that. In terms of outreach, when this first started, I did the very formal outreach. I've got the sheriff and all the police chiefs in Santa Barbara County on the phone, and I told them, about our meeting and what our emphasis was going to be. And to a person, every police chief and the sheriff made this their number one priority: in-home crimes. They wanted to make sure that all of their law enforcement officers in the county of Santa Barbara were very tuned in to what we expected would start happening. And so that was the immediate outreach. I think in terms of other kinds of outreach, we're going to have to be very creative and think way outside the box. For instance, this morning I read to a class of first graders. Why did I do that? Because I love kids and I love reading to them. But the other reason I did that is if I'm looking at 20 faces, looking in a little bit into everybody's home and what's going on, my radar could have gone off about any one of those 20 children. And I think the more educated people in our community, like me and Megan and Elena, and any teacher, healthcare provider, whatever, the more we have access to seeing what's happening in kids' lives, the more likely we are to be able to help them. So that would be my 2 thoughts on outreach.
One thought I've had during this crisis that we're in is having several friends who are teachers in the community, is the information that I've been hearing about kids not showing up for Zoom of all ages, just not showing up at all. And we're in such a tricky time right now about how do you reach out and reach into those families and find out what's happening with your family environment. And it had me thinking, I haven't talked to Joyce about this, but it had me thinking about our truancy program. Our truancy program is a proactive program that reaches out to kids who aren't showing up to schools. I think we have an opportunity, though we haven't hashed out any detail on this at all, to look at our truancy program as a mechanism somehow to reach back in as the school year resumes, whenever it resumes, and do well checks on some of these kids that maybe don't show up at school next year. That's to my liking. It's not to my liking because it's a few months off, but I think it's one way that we can do proactive outreach. The other thing we've been doing is a lot of radio programming, specifically around the area of Spanish-speaking individuals in the North County. We have a contract with a radio provider there. We do bi-weekly radio programs and also with our elder program. Radio is really popular and it's a great way, and we're starting to do more of that. And other communities, even business communities, are asking us to do informational outreach like this to members of the community about indicators for fraud in the time of COVID to the vulnerable populations in our county.
Let me just comment quickly on the two things Megan said.
Sure.
Megan, there's no reason for us to have to wait until school to start up. We can have our folks now start calling the kids who we're concerned about when they weren't attending school. So I know you were concerned about waiting. We don't have to wait. Secondly, Megan and Elena and I have been on K-Light 101 in the morning with some frequency, and I think that that's a great way to get it out. But Megan, we also have the radio stations where they speak Mistec, and that's been really important because that isn't a written language. And so really the only way for us to reach that group has been through the radio, and we have a special grant for that, and that's how we use that radio. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
And just so you know, we have a trilingual staff in Santa Maria who speaks Mixteco, so if we can be of support on this topic, she would likely be able to help with that particular outreach. I would just add, Liam, to your question, I think that the systemic nature of this is going to be just really critical because right now I think our partnerships in the medical community and working with pediatricians is highly important, because until our communities open up more broadly, we're going to only see these egregious, very intensive, horrible physical abuse cases, and pediatricians are going to need support. So I'm really proud of our partnerships with Cottage and other providers. We've created the Pediatric Resiliency Collaborative so that pediatricians can be as trauma informed and really looking a little bit deeper. I mean, doctors know, they know what to look for, but I think the severity and the intensity right now is going to be very difficult for them. So I think those partnerships are going to be really critical. And in the schools, we continue, although school's not in session in a traditional way, we've been partnering with teachers and administrators throughout this entire time, offering social emotional learning opportunities. We've also been doing some trainings for teachers as mandated reporters, to your point, Joyce, how when they have eyes on kids, but it's through a screen, what can you be looking for? How can you build connection? Because you want those kids to come back week upon week. So you don't want to scare that family off, but you have to be looking. So how do the roles of mandated reporters shift in this era? And if school comes back in the fall, it's likely to come back in a modified way. I'm guessing 2 days in, 2 days out. The stress on parents at that time is going to be skyrocketing. The stress on teachers, who many of them are parents and will have children at home. We're going to be dealing with levels of stress, and people are going to reach their breaking point. So another thing that I would just suggest as humans on the planet is that all of us think about who we know who are parents, especially working parents, and reach out to them, call them, email them, text them on a regular basis. How are you doing? I can't tell you. Like, it is hard. It is hard to do what we're all doing, those of us that are working parents. So when someone texts me and just asks how I'm doing, it can shift my mood for the day, and that might make me connect with my kids in a positive way instead of a not so positive way. And I have resources, and I have education, and I have access. I think about the parents who don't have all of those things and have more stressors than I do. They need that support. So I think those are things we can just do as people. So.
Yeah, and I know we could keep talking about this. I'd love to do that, but we want to be mindful of our time. So I want to pivot us just to the, there's 2 questions right now in the Q&A that haven't been answered yet. If there are others that come on, we'll try to answer those time permitting. But Jim Jackson asks, given that there are communities whose trust in the police has been shaken recently, it would seem that it might make it more difficult for families or friends to reach out for help or notify the authorities when confronted with potential signs of abuse. Is there a way to bolster that trust in our local communities, law enforcement, and DA's organizations?
Okay, I'll respond to that. First of all, we've always been concerned about that, which is why every time we talk about any kind of domestic violence or child abuse or sexual assault, we're giving the district attorney victim advocate phone number. So if people are hesitant to call 911, hesitant to get involved with law enforcement, the other option is to call a victim witness advocate who is bilingual, bicultural, and can help them sort that out so that they can be comfortable speaking in their own language and not talking to law enforcement, and help them work their way through that. In terms of how do you bolster trust, I think we are particularly lucky with the police chief we have. I think Lori Lunau has really made an effort to get into the community long before this happened. I have friends who, my best friend's the district attorney of Los Angeles, so been talking to her every night. She has a very different community than we have. I think you don't build trust after something like this happened. I think the building trust had to start happening sooner, and it has to keep happening, and it can't be presumed. And the other thing I want to make sure people understand is that your children understand what's going on. They know what's going on. If you have the news on and they're in the room, they're picking up on it. One of my grandchildren's little granddaughter, who's age 3, and I was taking her to my office when she was just about 3, and I decided I need to explain to her what I do. And I said that when bad people do bad things, I take them, I help them stay in jail so they can't do bad things to bad people. I tried to make it as simple as I could. And her response, and this is not a political response, her response was, Nona, are you gonna put Trump in jail today? And I said, why would I put Trump in jail? And she said, Nona, he takes away children from their mommies and daddies. Okay, my son and his wife have never discussed that whole issue with them, but they walk past the TV often enough, and she picked up on that, and she was worried about that. So I could address that with her. So understand that children see what's going on, and if you can give them the developmentally appropriate response to what their fear is, do that. And I can tell you, just as Elena said a little earlier ago, the parents and the grandparents, the aunts and the uncles, the close friends, are the ones they're going to trust. Just know that they're seeing the TV, know that they have questions, and see if you can figure out a good way to help them feel more secure.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joyce. I know you're saying that, they're going to hear it from somebody, right? So it should be from one of us, a parent, a mentor, my friend that will bring that truth. Great.
Thank you.
We keep talking about that, but I want to keep us moving. Anna Kukotovich has a question here with several specific examples, but wants to know, can you comment on why so few cases of abuse end up going to trial, and when they do, why rarely the suspect is found guilty?
Well, I love Anna, but I disagree with her. I don't think they rarely found. For 20 years, I did the vulnerable victim cases in my office, and I only lost one case, and that was not a vulnerable victim case, it was a drug deal case. I have the finest prosecutors in my office focused on vulnerable victim cases. We have 2 in North County, 2 in South County, and 1 in Lompoc. They're very aggressive, and I think we've been successful. Megan, you want to respond to that?
Taking myself off mute. Just reading the question here, it it always helps to know the specifics, which we can't get into detail about on this call. But what I will say is that when CALM engages, and the SART program engages child forensic interviewers like Anna, who did that for so many years for the program, and others like Adolfo and Sarah now, our conviction rate is really quite high. There could be innumerable factors that affect the outcome of a trial, not the least of which is the jury itself, and other things. So what I'll say about that is, but for the partnership that we have with CALM and the child forensic interviewers that are contracted with CALM in our office to do these interviews, the outcomes would be far more daunting than what they are. And we have a tremendous partnership that we're really proud of.
Yeah. Thank you. So we are running close to our time, and we want to be mindful of everyone's time. Why don't we ask our panelists just to share a brief closing comment, and then I have just a few remarks I'd like to share, and we'll wrap up our time together. So why don't we go in the same order here? Joyce, would you care to lead us off, please?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who, first I want to thank CALM for creating this. I want to thank you, Liam, for doing such an excellent job moderating it. But everybody who's on this call, there's so many other things you could be doing right now. You could be taking a walk on a beach, you could be working, you could be cleaning your kitchen, doing your laundry. There are a million things for you to do. But instead, you listen to this very depressing topic because you cared. And I'm overwhelmed with my admiration and appreciation of you for spending the time with us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Again, I want to thank everybody for this opportunity and those that tuned in. The reflection that I have around this time is that with adversity comes great opportunity. And many of our systems that we're accustomed to working in a certain way aren't working right now in the way that we're used to them functioning. And so I think together as we're doing this webinar, this is an opportunity. Someone asked earlier about outreach and education. I've been on some Zoom trainings through another coalition, YouthWell, that is focused on teen health and mental health. I've been really impressed with people's ability to pivot and get training and information. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity as we move forward. We're also going to garner many critical lessons, and we don't even know what they are yet. And I think to the extent that we keep on communicating and collaborating and working together and supporting each other, we will come out of this stronger as partners. And I thank you, Liam and Elena, for this opportunity, for all the support that Joyce has provided over the years and during this time, because I think to Elena's point, we have to support our people to continue to do the work in the face of their own adversity. So thank you.
I would just say that I think we need to prepare for the surge, the mental health surge. So we at CALM are talking about that actively. Liam, you know this as our board chair, that our board and senior staff is doing everything we possibly can to ensure that CALM is stable and strong and potentially even able to grow in coming years. We're talking to Santa Barbara Unified about expanding our partnership in their school district. I'm so grateful for their leadership, that they see the rising needs and they're worried about the social emotional well-being of their students, that academics can't happen if well-being doesn't exist. And so for those of you on this call or others that you might talk to, support your favorite agency. It does not have to be CALM. If it's CALM, that's great, but support agencies doing violence prevention, intervention, mental health, and supporting children and families. Like I said, this is going to be a long-lasting time, and our community will be stronger if children and families are stronger. So I think we all need to take care of ourselves. So I would just encourage everyone it's been a long 12 weeks, a very long 12 weeks, and now we find ourselves in a new moment, and all of us are tired. Some of our community is exhausted because they not only face the shelter in place, but they are facing such additional layers of generational and historical trauma. So I think take care of ourselves, be kind to one another, and invest in your community in a way that gives you joy, because there's tremendous work to be done. And the fabric of our nonprofit community is going to be tested during this economic recession, depression, and we rely on the community to help us do our good work. So I think in partnership, we can build a healthy future, but it's going to take a lot of work. So I value these colleagues on the call so much, and together I think we will do great work going forward.
Yeah, thank you all. I just want to again thank our panelists. I wish we were in person. I could give you, a bouquet of flowers and the hug from the podium or whatever would be appropriate. But thank you for your time today. Thank you, more importantly, for the work that you're doing to support the vulnerable in our community. And thank you to all of our attendees that, like Joyce said, opted to spend time hearing about the struggles and traumas that our community is experiencing. And we would love to help you as you all look for ways to serve our community and be a light. So if you do have additional questions or would like more information, you can get that. You can go to countyofsb.org/DA to find out more about Joyce and Megan and their work, or get contact information. And if you'd like to learn more about CALM, you can find that at calm4kids.org. That's calm, the number 4kids.org. And lastly, just want to remind you all that this was recorded. It will be, a link to this will be emailed out to you once we've got it all processed. And we'd also like to invite you to the next community conversation, which will be June 24th at 10 a.m. So we'll send out additional details about that. That conversation will be focused on education. How is the landscape of education changing? How will families experience that, and what new trials and opportunities will there be to serve our families? So again, thank you for your time. Panelists, thank you for your words and your great action. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.